I recently lived through my worst nightmare. The HOA president and her sons ambushed me on my own lakefront and then dialed 911 on me for trespassing. And their excuse, they said it was a shoreline conservation rule that magically granted them my land. Funny thing is, the only thing that vanished in the end was their smug smiles when the cops showed up. Let me start from the beginning. The morning sun was just thinking about peeking over Blackwood Ridge when the screaming started. Scout, my golden retriever. My best pal in the whole world, lifted his head from where he was sniffing at a turtle shell near the water's edge. His ears, usually floppy and relaxed, shot straight up. One low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound he rarely made. I had my old camera in hand, hoping to catch the mist rising off my little lake, the one I'd saved up for years to call my own. My own private slice of quiet. Or so I thought. You can't be here. The voice was shrill, like fingernails on a chalkboard, and it was coming closer fast. Scout moved to my side, no longer growling but standing stiff and alert, a furry golden protector. I lowered my camera, a knot tightening in my stomach. I knew that voice, Karen, president of the Harmony Hills Homeowners Association. A title she wore like a crown of thorns she expected everyone else to worship. She burst through the willow saplings I'd planted last spring. Her face flushed a blotchy red. Her phone already out and recording me. Her hair, a stiff helmet of blonde, looked like it could deflect small rocks. This is a restricted area. I'm filming you for evidence. You are in clear violation of HOA bylaw 7 subsection C, paragraph 2, shoreline serenity mandate. I took a slow breath, Karen, I said, trying to keep my voice calm the way you talk to a startled horse. This is my property, my lake, you're trespassing. Scout whined softly, pressing against my leg. He didn't like angry voices. Your property, she shrieked, stabbing a finger towards the small weathered tent I'd pitched near the fire pit. A $70 special. I used for naps when the fish weren't biting. That is an illegal campsite, an eyesore, and it's far too close to the water. What if your filth contaminates the pristine ecosystem? I am sworn to protect. She panned her phone dramatically around my tiny, tidy setup. A couple of camp chairs, a cooler, my fishing gear neatly stowed. It was hardly a super fun sight. Karen, the HOA line ends about a half-mile back at the main road. I explained. Trying again. This land has been privately owned for 70 years. I have the deed, the survey maps. Everything my world-weary side was kicking in. I'd dealt with petty tyrants before in my old job, and they all sang the same song of self-importance forged documents. I'm sure she spat. I'm calling the authorities. This is blatant disregard for community standards. She jabbed at her phone, her thumb mashing the screen. Yes, 911. I need deputies at Blackwood Lake. Immediately, there's a vagrant here set up an illegal camp, and he has a dangerous, aggressive animal with him. She glared at Scout, who was now sitting patiently, tail giving a hesitant thump on the pine needles. Dangerous Scout was more likely to lick you into submission. He's not a stray, Karen, he's my dog Scout, and he's not aggressive, I said. My voice hardening despite myself. This was crossing a line. My gritty protective instincts flared up. Not just for my land, but for my loyal companion. This woman was inventing dangers out of thin air. It's lunging, it's growling, I fear for my safety. She wailed into the phone, even though Scout hadn't moved an inch except to blink at her. The sheer audacity of her lies was breathtaking. I could see the red and blue lights reflecting off the trees long before I heard the sirens. They were coming up my private access road, a road I'd paid to have graded myself. Karen smirked, a look of pure, spiteful triumph on her face. This quiet morning meant for peace, and pictures had just exploded into a nightmare. And as those lights got closer, I wondered just how much power this woman thought she had, and what the deputies would actually do when faced with her bizarre, baseless accusations. My mind raced. How could I clearly show them she was the one in the wrong? What if they believed her about Scout? The thought sent a chill down my spine, colder than the morning air, before all this mess with Karen blew up like a trick cigar. Life was, well, it was quiet, just how I liked it. I'm Mark, by the way. After 25 years working a job that kept me moving, kept me analysing, kept me dealing with difficult people in tight spots, I'd finally saved enough to buy this little piece of heaven, 10 acres, mostly wooded with a small spring-fed lake right in the middle. My grandpa used to tell me stories about a place like this, a place where a man could hear himself think when I found it listed as fixer upper land. I knew it was the one. It wasn't much to look at. Then, overgrown, the old cabin falling in on itself. But I saw the bones of it, I saw the peace. And I had Scout came into my life about 5, and even bigger sad eyes. I told myself I'd find him a good home. Turns out his good home was with me. He's a golden retriever, though I suspect there's a bit of something else in there, something that makes him extra smart and fiercely loyal. He's my shadow, my confidant, the best fishing buddy a man could ask for. He doesn't talk back, doesn't complain if the fish aren't biting. And his joy at a simple walk in the woods can make a bad day good again. He's family. Simple as that, protecting him is as natural as breathing the Harmony Hills. HOA was something I knew existed. Of course, their manicured lawns and identical mailboxes were on the main road I had to use to get to my access track. I'd even had a few interactions. Minor stuff. Mostly an official-looking letter about the state of my mailbox, the one on the public road, mind you, not even on their precious development claiming it wasn't up to community aesthetic standards. I had politely pointed out their jurisdiction ended where my property began. Then there was the time Karen herself, in her golf cart with HOA president emblazed on the side, had followed me up my access road for a quarter mile, claiming my truck was kicking up too much dust on her road. It wasn't her road, each time I'd been firm, shown my paperwork, and she'd retreated muttering about disrespectful elements. I'd filed it under minor annoyance. I was world-out weary enough to know some people just craved control, but I never imagined it would escalate to this. My best friend Dave had warned me. Dave and I go way back, seen each other through thick and thin. He's a structural engineer sharp as a tack, and has a no-nonsense approach to life, Mark, he'd said, when I told him about buying the lake property. It's beautiful, man. Perfect for you. But that HOA Harmony Hills, they're legendary. My cousin lived there for a year, said the president. Some woman named Karen measures people's grass with a ruler and finds them. If their petunias are the wrong shade of pink, I'd laughed at the time. It seemed too ridiculous to be true. Now, not so much. Then there's Charlie. Charlie lives on the other side of Harmony Hills, an old-timer with a place even more remote than mine. Charlie's seen it all. He's a wiry little guy, always puttering in his yard full of stories, and surprisingly good moonshine. Or so I hear. He'd cornered me at the hardware store once. That Karen, he'd said, shaking his head, a twinkle in his eye. She tried to tell me my rooster was violating a noise ordinance. A noise ordinance in the county. I told her my rooster's been here longer than her fancy housing development, and he's got more sense too. She sent me a letter about Avon nuisance abatement. I framed it. Charlie found the humour in it, but even he admitted she was a thorn in the side of anyone who didn't fit her perfect little mould. So I wasn't entirely naive. I knew Karen was a busybody. What I hadn't grasped was the depth of her malice, or how far she'd go. When challenged, my methodical brain usually helped me plan for contingencies, but her level of unhinged fury, her willingness to lie to the 911 operator to call Scout dangerous, that caught me off guard, as those flashing lights drew closer, bouncing off the trees around my lake, the one I'd poured my heart and soul into. I felt a cold knot of anger mixed with a weary resignation. This wasn't going to be a simple misunderstanding, smoothed over with a polite chat. This was a fight, and Karen had just fired the first very loud shot. The question was, with deputies now pulling up their car doors opening with grim thuds, how was I going to convince them that the real menace wasn't me or my dog, but the well-dressed woman pointing a trembling, accusatory finger? The two deputies crunched their way over the pine needles, their faces unreadable. One was older, with a grey moustache and eyes that had seen a lot. The other was younger. Fidgeting slightly with the strap of his vest, Karen immediately launched into her tirade again. "He's a squatter, officers. This is HOA common land, a protected shoreline. He's got this vicious animal." She gestured wildly towards Scout, who, bless his heart, just wagged his tail a little, looking confused. "Ma'am, please," the older deputy said, his voice calm but firm. He held up a hand. "Let's just take this one step at a time." He turned to me. "Sir, can you tell me your name and what you're doing here?" "My name is Mark Ryland," I said, matching his calm tone, "and this is my property. Scout here is my dog." I was gritty. Yes, but I knew when to let the evidence do the talking. My methodical preparation for owning this land was about to pay off his property. Karen shrieked. "Impossible! The HOA owns all the shoreline around Blackwood Lake for conservation. Actually," "Karen," I said, keeping my eyes on the deputy. "The HOA owns a small strip on the east side of the lake, clearly marked on all the official plats. This is the west side, and I have my deed property survey and tax receipts right here in my truck if you'd like to see them." I nodded towards my old pickup parked a little ways up the track. This was part of my methodical nature. Always have your papers in order, especially when you live near people like Karen, the younger deputy, glanced at the older one, who gave a slight nod. "All right, Mr. Ryland, if you wouldn't mind showing us." I walked to my truck, Scout trotting happily beside me. Oblivious to the drama, Karen followed, still muttering about frauds and deception. I pulled out the worn leather satchel where I kept all my important documents. I handed the laminated deed, the Chris survey map with its clear boundary lines, and the most recent property tax bill to the older deputy. He took his time looking them over carefully, occasionally glancing at the map and then at the surrounding landscape. The younger deputy kept an eye on Karen, who was practically vibrating with impatience. "Well," Karen demanded, after a few minutes that felt like an hour, "it's all fake, isn't it?" The older deputy looked up, his expression unchanged. He handed the documents back to me. "Everything seems to be in order. Mr. Ryland, this is indeed your private property." He then turned to Karen. "Ma'am, it appears you're mistaken. You're currently trespassing on Mr. Ryland's land." Karen's jaw dropped. Her face went from red to a pale mottled white. Mistaken trespassing, but the shoreline serenity mandate the illegal camping. "The dangerous dog, ma'am," the deputy said, his voice a little sterner now. "This is private property. Mr. Ryland can camp here if he wishes. And his dog." He glanced at Scout, who was now trying to nudge his hand for a pat. "Doesn't appear to be dangerous in the slightest. In fact, calling 911 with false information is a serious offence," Karen sputtered. "But I'm the HOA president. I have a responsibility. Your responsibility ends where Mr. Ryland's property line begins," the deputy stated flatly. "I suggest you return to your own property, ma'am." She looked from the deputy to me. Her eyes filled with a venom that was genuinely shocking for a moment. I thought she might actually explode. Then her face hardened into a cold mask. "Fine," she hissed, her voice low and tight. She turned on her heel and stalked back towards the willow saplings. As she disappeared, she threw over her shoulder. "This isn't over, Riolance, not by a long shot." The deputies lingered for a moment. The older one gave me a look that was part apology, part warning. Some folks just can't stand not being in charge. You keep an eye out and call us if there's any more trouble. They got back in their cruiser and drove away, leaving me in a sudden ringing silence broken only by the chirping of crickets and Scout's happy panting. The relief was immense, but Karen's final threat echoed in my ears. "This isn't over. I looked down at Scout patting his head. He was my priority. My world-weary experience told me people like Karen didn't give up easily. They just changed tactics. My methodical brain started clicking. She'd tried public humiliation and false official reports. What would she try next? I had a feeling this was just the overture to a much uglier opera, and I needed to be ready for the main performance. My little piece of paradise suddenly felt a lot less secure. The rest of that day was shot the piece. I'd come to the lake for was gone, replaced by a simmering anger and a growing unease. Karen's parting words, "This isn't over," played on a loop in my head. I packed up my simple camp. Not because she'd won, but because the joy of it had been tainted. Scout seemed to sense my mood staying close, his usually exuberant tail giving only occasional thoughtful thumps. He knew something was wrong. My protective instincts were on high alert. It wasn't just about my land anymore. She'd threatened Scout, calling him dangerous, trying to get him taken away. Or worse, that was unforgivable that evening back at my small house on the edge of the property. I called Dave. "You were right about Karen," I said. No preamble. I could almost hear him sigh through the phone. "Let me guess," Dave said, his voice dry. "She tried to annex your lake and declare it a sovereign petunia sanctuary." I gave him the short version, the screaming, the filming, the 911, call the deputies, her final threat, man, that's escalated. He said, his tone serious now. "She's not just a busybody, she's unhinged. You need to be careful, Mark, people like that. When they feel their power slip, they can get nasty, really nasty." I know, I said, feeling that world-weary cynicism creep in. "That's why I'm upgrading my security. I already had a couple of wildlife trail cams set up, mostly to see what critters were visiting the lake at night, deer, raccoons, the occasional fox, but now they were going to serve a different purpose." I went out to the shed and dug out 2 more. I'd bought on sale and never bothered to set up fresh batteries. New high-capacity SD cards, my methodical side took over. I thought about Karen's likely approach routes, her possible targets. The tent site for sure, the path Scout always took to the W's edge for his morning drink. The small dock I'd built as dusk, settled casting long shadows across my yard. I headed back to the lake with Scout. He was excited, thinking we were going for a late-night adventure. I worked carefully, placing the cameras in inconspicuous spots, camouflaging them with leaves and branches. One was aimed directly at where my tent had been. Another covered the main path down to the water. A third watched the little homemade dock, and a fourth a wide angle. I positioned further back to get a broader overview of the area. It felt a bit like preparing for a siege, which was a ridiculous thought for a man who just wanted to fish in peace. But Karen wasn't a ridiculous problem anymore. She was a threat later that night. I sat at my kitchen table, nursing a lukewarm coffee Scout asleep at my feet. I kept replaying the morning's events. Her fury, her absolute conviction that she was right even when proven wrong, and that chilling final threat Dave's words echoed too nasty. Really nasty. Was I overreacting? Was she just going to send me a strongly worded letter full of made-up bylaws, or was she capable of more? My gut, honed by years of dealing with unpredictable situations, told me to expect the worst. I even had a brief amusing thought about Charlie. What would he do? Probably set up some elaborate comical booby trap involving a bucket of fish guts and a strategically placed rake. I smiled faintly. Charlie's approach was direct, if unconventional. Mine had to be more evidentiary if she was going to make a move. I needed proof, hard, undeniable proof. The kind that even someone as diluted as Karen couldn't argue her way out of sleep was a long time coming. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of leaves outside had me tensing up, Scout sensing. My restlessness occasionally lifted his head and let out a soft, reassuring sigh, before dozing off again. He trusted me to keep us safe, and I attended to the question that kept nagging at me. Though was exactly these cameras capture, would it be Karen sneaking around with a clipboard taking notes for her next fictional citation? Or would it be something far more sinister? The anticipation was a heavy weight. The next morning I was up before dawn, a knot of anxiety coiling in my stomach. I made coffee, my movements deliberately slow and quiet, trying to project a calm. I didn't feel Scout watch me, his big brown eyes questioning. "Just another day, buddy," I murmured, scratching behind his ears, though I knew it probably wasn't. My methodical plan was in place. Check the trail cams, assess the situation, then decide on the next step. My gritty resolve was there too. I wouldn't be intimidated off my own land. As soon as there was enough light to see, I headed down to the Lake Scout, trotting eagerly ahead, then pausing to wait for me. As if sensing this wasn't our usual leisurely stroll, I went to the first camera, the one aimed at the old tent site. My hands were surprisingly steady as I unlatched the waterproof casing and retrieved the SD card. Then the second by the water path, the third near the dock, and the fourth the overview camera. 4 little cards potentially holding answers, or just hours of footage of rustling leaves. Back in my kitchen, I slid the first card into my laptop. My heart hammered against my ribs. The footage started with the usual nighttime visitors. A young buck cautiously picking its way through the trees. A family of raccoons meticulously washing something at the water's edge. Then, around 2 a.m., the timestamp showed new figures. Human figures. 3 of them. My breath caught in my throat. The infrared night vision wasn't crystal clear, but it was good enough. The lead figure short, stocky, with that unmistakable helmet of hair. Even in grainy black and white, Karen, and with her 2 younger, taller figures, her sons, I presumed I'd seen them around town. Usually driving too fast in their souped-up pickup truck faces set in permanent sneers. They were carrying something. I watched horrified as the scene unfolded. Karen directed them like a general deploying troops. They moved to where my tent had been pitched just the day before. One of the sons pulled out a long, wicked-looking knife. He started slashing at the empty air where the tent fabric would have been a vicious, almost gleeful energy in his movements. Then he methodically stabbed and ripped an imaginary ground sheet. It was a pantomime of destruction, but the intent was chillingly clear. If my tent had been there, it would have been shreds. Then Karen pointed towards the water's edge, right where Scout always went for his morning drink. The exact spot I'd focused one of the other cameras on. She handed something small and glinting to the other son. He knelt down. The camera angle wasn't perfect, but I could see him scattering these small objects into the shallow water and onto the muddy bank. My blood ran cold. Fishing hooks. The audio was faint, distorted by the wind, but I cranked up the volume. Snippets of their conversation came through. "Teach him a lesson." Karen's voice sharp and venomous. "Ruin the hermit's life," one of the sons. A low growl, "and make sure that Mutt doesn't cause any more trouble." The other son. "They were talking about me. They were talking about Scout." I quickly swapped to the SD card from the camera near the water path. The footage was even more damning. It showed a close-up of the son's hand deliberately pressing barbed fishing hooks, dozens of them, into the soft mud points upwards. He even embedded some in the low-hanging willow branches, right at nose height for a dog. It was a minefield, specifically designed to maim my dog. A wave of fury washed over me, so intense it made me shake. This wasn't just petty vandalism. This wasn't an HOA dispute. This was calculated cruelty. This was a deliberate attempt to injure Scout to terrorise me. The Shoreline Serenity mandate was a smoke OKC screen for a vindictive, malicious nature that I had dangerously underestimated. My world-weary cynicism hadn't prepared me for this level of personal targeted evil from a suburban HOA president. I saved the footage, my hands trembling now. Not with fear, but with a cold, hard rage. My protective instincts screamed. They had declared war, not just on my peace, but on my family. The core question how far will a man go to defend his own, suddenly had a very clear, very immediate answer forming in my mind. This evidence was explosive, but what was the safest, smartest way to use it? Confront them directly, or go straight to the deputies? The thought of those hooks waiting for Scout made my decision for me. I couldn't wait. I had to make sure that area was safe, and I had to face these people. But how would they react when they knew I had seen their disgusting work? The rage was a fire in my gut, but my methodical brain was still working, trying to override the immediate visceral urge to charge over to Karen's house. And, well, let's just say it wouldn't have been pretty. I had the footage, undeniable proof of their conspiracy, their malice, their intent to harm Scout, but simply handing it to the deputies felt incomplete. They had tried to hurt my dog, my best friend. They had plotted to ruin my life. This needed more than just a police report filed from a distance. My gritty side, the part of me that had faced down threats before, told me I needed to confront them. Not for a fight necessarily, but to let them know I knew I made a copy of the SD card contents onto a USB drive, then another copy one for the police. One for Dave, just in case the original SD cards I pocketed. I grabbed my sturdiest walking stick, more for reassurance than a weapon or so, I told myself, and clipped Scout's leash on. He was bouncing ready for his morning walk, blissfully unaware of the danger he'd narrowly avoided. "We're going for a walk, buddy," I said, my voice tight, but we need to be very careful down by the water we walked towards the lake. Me scanning the ground like a hawk scout sniffing the air as we neared the usual drinking spot. I held him back. "Easy, boy." I could see them, the glint of metal in the mud, the almost invisible lines of hooks hanging from the branches. It was worse than the video showed. My stomach churned carefully. I guided Scout away from the immediate area, my eyes sweeping the shoreline, and then I saw them. Karen and her two hulking sons were standing near the remains of my old fire pit, looking towards my property, almost as if they were admiring their handiwork from the night before, or perhaps planning their next move. They hadn't seen me yet. They were about 50 yards away. This was it. "Karen," I called out. My voice louder, harsher than I intended. Scout let out a short bark, sensing the tension. The three of them spun around. Surprise flickered across Karen's face, quickly replaced by a sneer. Her sons looked smug like bullies who thought they'd gotten away with something. Well, look who it is," Karen said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Come to apologise for your illegal activities, Mr. Ryland." "I know what you did last night," I said, walking slowly towards them, keeping Scout close by my side on a short leash. "I have it all on camera, slashing my tent-planting hooks to injure my dog, plotting to ruin my life." The smug looks vanished. Karen's face went pale. The taller son, the one who'd scattered the hooks, took an involuntary step back. The other one, the knife wielder, just stared, his eyes narrowing. What are you talking about?" Karen stammered, but there was no conviction in her voice. "We were nowhere near here last night." "Really?" I said, pulling my phone from my pocket. I'd queued up a short clip then. "Who are these people?" I held up the phone, playing the footage of them at the water's edge. The quality wasn't great in the daylight on a small screen, but it was enough for a moment. There was dead silence. Then the shorter, stockier son, the one who had had the knife, lunged not at me but at my phone. He knocked it out of my hand and it clattered onto the rocky ground, the screen shattering. No evidence now. "Old man," he snarled before I could react, the other son. The taller one grabbed a heavy wooden canoe paddle that had been leaning against a tree. One of theirs apparently left from their nocturnal visit. He swung it like a baseball bat. This was the twist I hadn't fully anticipated. I'd expected denial, maybe more threats, not a sudden violent assault. I twisted, trying to get out of the way. The paddle connected with my left arm and shoulder with a sickening thud pain. White hot and immediate shot through me. I stumbled back, trying to keep my feet. Scout, seeing me attacked, barked furiously and lunged at the sun with the paddle, trying to protect me. But as he did, His front paw landed right in the patch of mud where they had scattered the hooks. He let out a terrible high-pitched yelp of pain and stumbled, holding his paw up, blood welling from it. Karen just stood there, watching a horrified, yet somehow still malevolent expression on her face. Her plan, her son's violence. It was all spiralling out of control. My arm was screaming, my phone was smashed, and Scout was hurt. The situation had just gone from bad to infinitely worse. How are we going to get out of this? They were two young, strong men, armed and aggressive, and I was injured with my dog, also a casualty of their malice pain, sharp, searing pain in my arm, making my vision swim for a second. Scout's yelp of agony cut through me. Deeper than any physical blow could my protective instincts already on fire went into overdrive. Forget the land, forget the HOA, forget everything but getting Scout out of there, getting us both to safety. My world-weary mind knew this was no longer a situation for reasoned argument or presenting evidence. This was survival. The son with the paddle was raising it again, his face contorted with rage. The other one who'd smashed my phone was looking for a rock, a weapon. Karen was yelling something incoherent, a mix of fear and fury. I didn't have time to think, only to act. My gritty resolve kicked in. I wasn't going down without a fight, but a direct confrontation, now injured and outnumbered, was foolish. "Scout, come!" I yelled, my voice strained. Despite his injured paw, he limped towards me, whining, blood dripping onto the leaves. I scooped him up. He's a big dog over 70 pounds, and the agony in my arm made lifting him excruciating. But adrenaline is a powerful thing. He whimpered, licking at my face, confused and in pain. "You're not going anywhere, old man." The paddle wielder shouted, advancing. I backed away, cradling Scout my walking stick. The one I'd brought for reassurance was still in my right hand, as the sun lunged, swinging the paddle wildly. I thrust the heavy end of the stick forward, jamming it hard into his gut. He let out a surprised oof and doubled over. Momentarily winded, it wasn't a knockout blow, but it bought me a precious second. I turned and ran, or rather, a stumbling, lurching jog hampered by Scout's weight and the throbbing in my arm. I could hear them shouting behind me, Karen screaming, "Get him! Don't let him get away!" The fear of them catching us, of what they'd do to Scout if they did, spurred me on. I crashed through the underbrush, ignoring the branches whipping at my face, focused only on reaching my truck, parked further up the access road. Every step sent jolts of pain through my arm, but Scout's warm weight and his soft whimpers against my chest kept me going. He was depending on me. I risked a glance back. The sons were following, but they were heavier, less agile in the dense woods, and the one I jabbed was still moving slower. I had a small lead. Reaching the truck felt like crossing a finish line. I fumbled with the door handle. My injured arm, almost useless, finally got it open. I gently placed Scout on the passenger seat. He immediately started licking his bleeding paw. My heart ached seeing him like that. I scrambled into the driver's seat, keys already in my hand. Another habit from my methodical old life: always be ready for a quick departure. The engine roared to life. I slammed it into reverse, spun the wheel, and gunned it down the track, not caring about the ruts or the overhanging branches in the rearview mirror. I saw them emerge from the woods, Karen and her two brutes watching me go, their faces masks of fury and frustration. They hadn't won. Not yet. Once I was on the main road heading away from Harmony Hills. I pulled over for a moment, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My arm was on fire. Scout was still whimpering, his paw looking terrible. I felt a surge of cold, hard determination. My phone was smashed. Yes, but the original SD cards with all the footage, the sabotage, their incriminating words, and now, by implication, the lead-up to this assault was safe in my pocket. My moral crossroads was brief. Vigilante justice was tempting, incredibly tempting, the thought of what I'd like to do to those thugs who hurt my dog. But my methodical brain, even through the pain and anger, knew the smarter play, The only play if I wanted real justice, not just revenge. I had to get Scout to a vet, and I needed to see a doctor. But first the deputies. They'd warned me Karen wouldn't give up. They'd seen her lies firsthand. Now I had irrefutable proof of not just her malice, but of violent assault and animal cruelty. This wasn't about HOA bylaws anymore. This was a criminal matter. The question was, would the deputies see it that way, or would Karen's HOA president status somehow shield her and her violent offspring? Once again, the emergency vet clinic was a blur of concerned faces and hushed efficiency. Scout brave as ever. Hardly made a sound as the vet gently cleaned his poor 3 deep cuts. One dangerously close to attendant, they'd have to sedate him to properly stitch it up and check for any embedded hook fragments leaving him there. Even in capable hands felt like leaving a part of myself behind the vet. A kind woman named Dr. Ramirez assured me they'd take good care of him. "He's a lucky boy," she said, looking at the cleaned wounds. "These look like fishing hooks deliberately placed." I just nodded, a grim tightness in my jaw. The word deliberately hung in the air. Next stop, the emergency room for myself. The x-rays showed a fractured ulna, my left forearm, and severe bruising all the way up to my shoulder. They cleaned and dressed a nasty gash on my arm where the paddle had broken the skin. As the doctor wrapped my arm in a temporary cast, he asked how it happened. "An argument with some neighbours that got out of hand," I said. Keeping it vague for now, he raised an eyebrow but didn't press my good arm. My right was functional. My resolve was more than functional. It was forged steel with Scout's safe for the moment, and my arm stabilised. I drove to the sheriff's department. It was late afternoon now. The same older deputy from the lake incident, Sergeant Miller, was on duty. His eyes widened slightly when he saw my arm in a sling, and the raw anger I knew must be etched on my face. "Mr. Ryland, what happened to you?" he asked, his voice serious. "Karen happened, Sergeant." I said, my voice flat, Karen and her sons. "It escalated, just like you warned it might." I laid it all out for him methodically. Chronologically, the trail cams the footage of Karen and her sons slashing an imaginary tent, scattering the barbed hooks. Their voices clear enough on the audio, plotting to ruin the hermit's life and deal with my mutt. Then the confrontation that morning, the smashed phone, the assault with the canoe paddle and Scout's injury directly caused by the hooks they had planted. As I spoke, I could see Sergeant Miller's expression harden. This wasn't just a crank HOA president anymore. This was a string of serious crimes. When I finished, I placed the small plastic bag containing the 4 SD cards on his desk. This is the footage. Sergeant, everything, their sabotage, their plotting, and it'll show them at the scene of the assault with the paddle they used. My methodical documentation was key. I wasn't just making accusations, I was delivering the evidence gift-wrapped. Sergeant Miller picked up the bag, looking at the tiny cards. "You said they smashed your phone." "Yes." After I showed them a glimpse of the footage on it, they thought they were destroying the only copy. A grim smile touched my lips. "Amateurs." He nodded slowly. "I need to view this immediately, and I need a formal statement from you." Mr. Ryland, a detailed one. We spent the next hour in a small interview room. Me recounting everything again while another deputy typed it all up. I described the hooks, the paddle, the threats, the exact words I could remember. I signed the statement, my signature, a bit shaky from my good hand. "All right, Mr. Ryland," Miller said. When we were done, he looked tired but resolute. "What you've described, and what I hope this footage confirms, points to multiple felonies. Conspiracy, aggravated, assault, animal cruelty, destruction of property, possibly more." He paused. "We take this very seriously. What happens now?" I asked, my voice betraying some of my world-weary skepticism. I'd seen systems fail before now. Sergeant Miller said, a new steely edge to his voice. "We go get a warrant. And then I think it's time we paid Karen and her boys a visit. They won't soon forget. The thought of that raid of Karen's smug world finally crashing down was a small comfort. But it wasn't over. Not until they were facing real consequences as I left the station. The setting sun painting the sky in angry reds and oranges. I couldn't help but wonder, would this be enough? Would the system truly work this time, or would Karen's lawyers find some loophole, some way to twist this back on me? The night ahead felt very long. The call from Sergeant Miller came just as dawn was breaking. I hadn't slept much. Replaying the assault, worrying about Scout, my arm throbbing. Despite the painkillers, my small house felt empty without Scout's quiet breathing. In the corner, Mr. Ryland Miller's voice was crisp but professional. We executed the search warrant at Karen Apprentice's residence. About an hour ago, my breath caught and it was illuminating. He said, a hint of grim satisfaction in his tone. We found the canoe paddle still had traces of what we believed to be your blood on it. We found a container of fishing hooks in one of the son's rooms, identical to the ones your vet removed from your dog's paw, and those you described seeing at the lake. Relief washed over me, so potent it almost buckled my knees. Evidence, tangible physical evidence backing up my story and the trail cam footage. But that's not all. Mr. Ryland Miller continued. Things got a bit more interesting. How? So I asked my methodical mind kicking into gear, what else could there be, while searching for any other potential weapons or evidence related to the assault and animal cruelty. We came across Karen Apprentice's HOA office in her spare bedroom. He paused for effect. It seems your little dispute, Mr. Ryland might have just scratched the surface of something much bigger. This was the twist, the second one that I never saw coming. I had been so focused on Karen's personal vendetta against me and Scout, her irrational rage about my property. It never occurred to me that her malice might be part of a larger, more calculated scheme. What did you find? I urged. Well, for starters, a whole stack of pre-printed HOA violation notices, blank ones, but signed by Karen as president, and not just for things like lawn maintenance or unapproved paint colours. We found templates for violations like environmental contamination, unauthorised shoreline development, creating a public nuisance, very serious, very official-looking documents, almost like a kit for intimidating residents. My mind flashed back to her accusations against me. Illegal campsite filth contaminating the pristine ecosystem. She wasn't just making it up on the fly. She had a playbook, and then Miller went on, his voice lowering slightly. We found her ledgers, financial records for the Harmony Hills HOA. At first glance, they look creative, very creative, large, vaguely described consulting fees paid out to companies. We can't immediately find any record of special assessment funds that don't seem to correspond to any actual work done in the community. And a lot of cash withdrawals. I was stunned. This wasn't just about a power-tripping HOA president anymore. This sounded like embezzlement fraud, I asked, barely above a whisper. It's too early to say for sure, Miller cautioned, but the financials are definitely raising red flags all over the place. We've seized the documents and computers. We'll be bringing in a forensic accountant. It seems Karen Apprentice might have been running more than just an HOA. Mr. Ryland, she might have been running a racket suddenly. Karen's desperation to control her little fiefdom, her extreme reactions to any challenge to her authority started to make a horrible kind of sense if she was cooking the books. Any scrutiny, any outside interference like me refusing to bow to her fake bylaws could threaten to unravel her entire scheme. My little lake, my desire for peace, had inadvertently poked a stick into a much larger, uglier hornet's nest. Charlie's words about Karen came back to me. She's got more angles than a broken protractor. He'd meant it as a Foley exaggeration, a comment on her general officiousness. But maybe he'd been more right than he knew. And Dave, my best friend. He was an engineer good with numbers and details if the HOA financials were as crooked as Miller suspected. Dave would have a field day picking them apart, so the assault the hooks, that was to silence me, to scare me off because I wouldn't play by her rules, and she was afraid I'd somehow expose her bigger game. I was thinking aloud, the pieces clicking into place. That's one strong possibility we're looking into. Miller confirmed your refusal to be intimidated might have been a direct threat to her enterprise. The raid hadn't just turned up evidence of the attack on me and Scout. It had potentially blown open a much wider conspiracy. Karen wasn't just a spiteful bully, she was potentially a calculated criminal. The charges against her and her sons were about to get a lot more serious, and I wondered how many other residents of Harmony Hills had been victims of her creative HOA management too. Afraid or too worn down to fight back. This was far from over. In fact, it felt like it was just beginning. The news of the raid and the initial findings spread through Harmony Hills like wildfire. Suddenly, my quiet, unassuming self became the reluctant centre of a storm sergeant. Miller had been discreet, but word gets out in a small community, especially when it involves the HOA president flashing lights and deputies carrying out boxes of documents. The charges against Karen were formal battery for the attack on me, felony animal cruelty for what they did to Scout, and filing a false police report for the initial 911 call. Her sons Brent and Kyle were charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, the paddle, and conspiracy. But it was the whispers of financial wrongdoing, the hints of a much larger deception that really set the neighbourhood buzzing. My best friend Dave, true to form, was both outraged on my behalf and grimly fascinated by the potential financial shenanigans. "Forensic accountants Mark," he'd said over the phone, a note of almost gleeful anticipation in his voice. "If those Harmony Hills books are cooked, they'll find it embezzlers always get sloppy. They think they're smarter than everyone else." He offered to come down to help me sort through any legal papers or just to provide backup. His loyalty was a rock a few days after the arrests, as I was nursing my still sore arm and checking in on Scout, who was recovering well. Though his trust in strangers had taken a hit, I got a call. It was from a group of Harmony Hills residents. They wanted to meet cautiously. I agreed. They suggested the community clubhouse, a place I'd never set foot in. The meeting was like something out of a movie. About 20 people were there. A mix of older folks, young families, all looking worried and angry. A woman named Sarah, who seemed to be the unofficial spokesperson, stood up. "Mr. Ryland," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "First, we want to apologise for what happened to you and your dog Karen. Apprentice does not represent us. We had no idea. Well, some of us suspected things weren't right, but we never imagined this." Then the story started tumbling out. One elderly man, Mr. Henderson, spoke of exorbitant fines for the wrong type of rose bushes. Fines that had to be paid in cash directly to Karen. A young couple talked about a special assessment for phantom lake dredging that never happened. Another woman described how Karen had threatened to put a lien on her house over the placement of a child's swing set. It was a pattern of intimidation, extortion, and abuse of power, all under the guise of HOA rules. My methodical mind catalogued each story, recognising the templates Miller had found. Then, Charlie, who'd apparently been invited as a sort of elder statesman of Karen resistance, stood up. He wasn't even an HOA member, but everyone knew him. "Folks," he said, his voice surprisingly strong, "I've been saying for years that woman was wound tighter than a cheap watch, and twice as crooked. She tried to fine me from my roosters. Crow said it violated the decibel decorum declaration. I told her the only thing violating decorum was her hat." A ripple of much-needed laughter went through the room. "Point is," Charlie continued, serious again, "this fella here. He nodded at me. He stood up to her. He got hurt doing it. His dog got hurt. And because he did, maybe the rest of you can finally get some justice too. It was a showdown, all right, but not the kind with guns and fists. This was a community finding its voice. My testimony to the deputies, the evidence from my trail cams had been the spark. Now these residents were ready to provide the fuel they started organising, collecting their own records of Karen's dubious fines and vague threats. They hired a lawyer not just to oust Karen from the HOA, which was a given, but to assist the authorities with the financial investigation. The HOA itself was in chaos. The remaining board members, a group of mostly timid individuals who had clearly been steamrolled by Karen for years, were in full panic mode. An emergency meeting was called. I was asked to attend to share my story directly. Standing in front of that packed room, my arms still in a sling, I recounted what Karen and her sons had done. I didn't raise my voice. I just laid out the facts, the premeditated cruelty, the violence when I spoke of Scout's injury, a wave of sympathy, and, for some shame, washed over the room, my protective nature, which had been so focused on Scout and my property, now found itself extending in a small way to these people who had also been bullied. They saw in my experience the extreme end of what they had all endured in smaller doses. The core emotional question, how far will a man go to defend his own, had expanded. It wasn't just about my land or my dog anymore. It was about standing against a bully who had terrorised an entire community. The legal battle was just beginning, but the fight for Harmony Hill's soul was well underway. The question now was, would the combined weight of the criminal charges and the community's uprising be enough to ensure Karen Apprentice and her enablers never held power again? The wheels of justice, as they say, grind slowly, but they do grind. The weeks that followed were a flurry of legal activity. Karen and her sons, Brent and Kyle, made bail much to the neighbourhood's disgust, but their movements were restricted. The evidence against them for the assault and animal cruelty was overwhelming, thanks to the trail cam footage and the physical evidence from the raid. My testimony, along with Scout's vet records and my medical reports, formed the backbone of that part of the case. Scout bless. His resilient heart was healing remarkably well. His limp was almost gone, though he remained. Wary of sudden movements and loud voices near the lake, he stuck closer to me than ever, a furry four-legged reminder of what we'd endured, the financial investigation into the Harmony Hills HOA. However, was rapidly becoming the bigger story. The forensic accountants Dave had so enthusiastically predicted were indeed having a field day. They peeled back layers of deception, uncovering a systematic siphoning of HOA funds over several years. Bogus invoices, ghost employees, and those consulting fees paid to shell corporations Karen had set up. It was all there, a testament to her greed and arrogance. It turned out my little stand at the lake had indeed pulled the plug on her entire corrupt operation. Charlie became something of a local hero, regaling anyone who would listen at the hardware store with his theories on Karen's downfall, usually involving her opidity, Petunia's plotting revenge, see he'd say, winking even. The flowers knew she was a crook. His humour was a welcome relief in an otherwise tense time. The trial, when it finally came, was a local media sensation. HOA president from hell, the headline screamed Karen stripped of her presidential title and facing a phalanx of angry homeowners in the gallery every day looked diminished. Her helmet hair slightly deflated. Her sons sat beside her, sullen and defiant, though their bravado seemed to crack a little. When the footage of them scattering hooks and attacking me was played in court, my testimony was straightforward. I recounted the events, my voice steady. The defence attorney tried to paint me as an aggressive recluse who had provoked the Apprentice family, but the trail cam footage, objective and emotionless, shredded that narrative. When they showed the pictures of Scout's injured paw, a collective gasp went through the courtroom. My protective feelings for Scout and for the peace of my land were evident to everyone. The climax came during the financial testimony. The forensic accountant laid out Karen's scheme in excruciating detail, tracing the money trail from the HOA's accounts into her personal coffers. The sheer scale of the theft was shocking, hundreds of thousands of dollars meant for community upkeep now gone. Other residents testified to her intimidation tactics, painting a picture of a petty tyrant who had used fear and fraudulent fines to control and exploit her neighbours. The jury didn't take long. Guilty on all counts: Karen Apprentice battery felony, animal cruelty, filing of false police report, and multiple counts of grand larceny and fraud Brent and Kyle Apprentice, aggravated assault conspiracy and animal cruelty. The judge, a stern-faced woman who clearly had no patience for bullies, delivered scathing remarks before handing down the sentences. Karen received a significant prison term justice for her cruelty and her greed. Her sons also got jail time, though less than their mother, given their ages and her clear role as the ringleader. The Harmony Hills HOA was in tatters, but also in a strange state of liberation. They formally expelled Karen, a mere formality by then, and the board members, who had been complicit through their silence, resigned. A new board was elected filled with residents determined to rebuild trust and manage the community's affairs. Honestly, one of their first acts was to issue a formal public apology to me and to cover all of Scout's vet bills and my medical expenses, plus a settlement for damages to my property and the emotional distress caused. The day the moving vans came to empty Karen's house was a quiet day of celebration in Harmony Hills. No parties, just a collective sigh of relief. My little returned to its peaceful state, the shoreline serenity mandate, along with all of Karen's other nonsensical, self-serving rules, was officially rescinded Scout. And I could finally enjoy our sunrises, our fishing, our quiet naps by the water. Undisturbed, the answer to that core question, how far will a man go to defend his own, was clear. I'd gone as far as was necessary. And in doing so, a measure of peace and justice had been restored, not just for me and Scout, but for an entire community that had lived under a shadow of spite for far too